Welcome to another edition of Teach the Geek interviews. My name is Neil Thompson. I am the founder of Teach the Geek. It's an online platform for science and engineering professionals. I'm also the creator of the Teach the Geek to Speak public speaking course. It's an online course. You can learn more about it at teachthegeek.com. Again, that is teachthegeek.com. Today, my guest is Zachary Evans. He is a reservoir storage engineer. I must admit, I have no clue what that means, so I'm definitely going to ask him that during our conversation. He's also regional director for North America of the Society of Petroleum Engineers. I'm really interested to learn more about his interest in petroleum engineering, his work with the Society of Petroleum Engineers, and the ways in which public speaking has benefited him. Welcome to Teach the Geek interview, Zachary.
Well, thanks for having me, Neil.
So from the bit of research I did on you, I saw that you got a degree in petroleum engineering. What was the motivation to get that degree?
Well, there's a very long story that I don't know if we have time for on that, but let's just say I had not intended to be a petroleum engineer when I went to school. When I went to school, I'm originally from West Virginia. I still live in West Virginia, and I went to West Virginia University for college. I was very much going to be an engineer, but originally I was going to be a computer and electrical engineer. But one of the good things about the program at WVU and other schools around the country is you can't declare your engineering major your first year. You can major in general engineering, pick your discipline the second year, and so your freshman year you get a lot of exposure, open houses, and other general prerequisite courses that kind of helps you find what you would like to specialize in to make a little bit more of an informed decision. So I went in with a very clear plan and then pivoted very quickly when I realized that those two disciplines in computer and electrical weren't for me. And then some of the opportunities in the petroleum engineering discipline, talking with some of their senior students and some of the faculty members, it really appealed to me. So it wasn't really the plan, but it just shows the importance of being flexible and adapting to new information as you get it.
Nice. I remember during my first year of university, I took a class it was a computer engineering class. It was a required class. We did coding in C. And after that class, I realized that computer engineering definitely was not in my future. I didn't have the patience to code. Whenever it wouldn't compile properly, it would be very upsetting. I just remember thinking, how can people deal with this on a daily basis? This is definitely not something I want to do. So yeah, I fully understand, going in there with one thing and then coming out with something completely different. Yeah, I totally get that. So once you get a degree in petroleum engineering, so what type of work do you do working, coming out of school as a petroleum engineer?
Yeah, so a lot of folks, basically you're working in the oil and gas industry. A lot of folks kind of make the misconception that we work more in kind of what we would call the downstream portion of the industry, which is more in chemical refining. And that's more of a chemical engineering or a process engineering role. We work in what's called the upstream or the midstream. So it's basically in all the exploration for oil and gas, and then the production, right? So the drilling of wells, the installation of surface facilities, and then the midstream is the pipeline transport and storage part of getting those commodities to market, some of the processing, liquid natural gas, other kind of gas treatment type opportunities. So the work I did right out of school was I had several positions overseas for about 3.5 years, working for a major international service company. I was offshore. I was doing kind of the stereotypical things that people think about when they think about working in the oil and gas industry. I was very much, working on platforms in the South China Sea or offshore in the Persian Gulf. I did that for 3 years. It was a great experience and lived all around the world. But for the last 15 years or so, I've worked in the midstream portion of the business in underground gas storage, where we essentially store natural gas in depleted reservoirs. Basically the same underground formations that house those products originally, but we use them for storage, essentially to provide heating for the Northwest, the Northeast, the Midwest, and other areas of the country where there's not enough production of natural gas during the cold months to meet demand, right? It's one of those things that we store about 4 trillion cubic feet of natural gas every year to get through the winter. It's one of those things that people don't really know happens, but without it, you wouldn't be able to live in most of the places in a lot of the big cities in the country just because there's not enough natural gas for home heating uses.
Oh, wow. That's pretty cool. So out of curiosity, when you come out of school and you start working, was the working world what you expected it to be?
Oh, no, not at all. And this is, I actually do a lot as we'll talk about, a lot of speaking with students and kind of trying to provide some, I hate the word mentorship because it sounds pretentious, but I guess that's the word. And that's one of the main pieces of information I deliver is that, your education and a lot of great institutions, and I got a good, academic education. But school is not designed to necessarily prepare you for the working world. That's a kind of a flaw in our system, I think. But ultimately, getting a degree is not the same thing as being prepared for a vocational track, right? So there were a lot of things that I learned very quickly being thrust into the working world. And it's not that it's the things you couldn't overcome, but it's, the more you treat your education in a practical fashion, the more you realize that you're getting qualifications for potential career, for potential job. It helps you to prepare for that in ways that unfortunately I didn't. But you learn, baptism by fire is the term that was often used in on the oil field. But you learn very quickly. But while it wasn't exactly what I had expected, it was certainly something I came to appreciate and learned to adapt to. Uh, Doing so on the fly as opposed to being prepared for that, coming into it.
Yeah, you know what? I fully agree with you about the lack of preparation for the workforce coming out of an engineering degree, Zachary. At least that applied to me as well. You when you're in school, there's a lot of technical stuff that you got to learn, and I get that. You're going to likely be the technical person on a team or just working in a company, but then how do you relate to the other people that work there? I mean, it's not a company of one. You're working with
Right.
a bunch of people, and how do you talk to these other people? And it's just and you might think, well, that's obvious, but no, not always because
No, no,
you're very. Well, go ahead.
no. I mean, you're exactly right. I mean, it's the kind of, it's not just understanding the business itself, some of the more kind of fiscally focused and fiduciary focused type activities, but also, like you said, understanding hierarchies, understanding how to, take direction from leadership, how to lead others, how to collaborate. It's a lot of those soft skills. We talk about soft skills a lot in a very broad term, and oftentimes I think we kind of oversaturate to the point of watering down what that means. But like you said, the ability to communicate, to work effectively with other people, to take criticism constructively and not as a ad hominem attack. These are the kind of things that, like you said, maybe sound intuitive, but in practice, it's not as intuitive for most people as we would like it to be. So that's as much as part of the education process as, like you said, learning the equations, learning the theory. And then even beyond that, it's I'm sure you're like me and like a lot of folks, we engineers like things concrete. We like to see a practical application. There's a certain value to the theory, but it's how is that going to actually be used? And so that's oftentimes a disconnect between the classroom and the first job you get is, as soon as you get out of college and you get that first job, nobody cares about your grades anymore. You know what I mean? They care about what do you actually know, what can you do for me? And so that's oftentimes a big shock, a big culture shock. Is it's not about what you can show me you can do on paper. It's what can you actually provide, in terms of being a valuable employee.
Yeah, I'm sure for the people that have really high grades, that's not something that they want to hear. It's like I busted my ass to get this 4.0 whatever
Hey,
GPA. Now
good,
you tell me
but
you don't
like,
care.
no, well, I mean, no one cares after you get that first job, but that first job depends a lot on your performance too. So the grades are certainly important, but the longer you go in your career, the less your academics are in play. It's more about what your experience is, right? So and that's universal. It's highly pronounced in the petroleum engineering field because we are a very experiential type of industry. But I think it's pretty universal to every line of work, which is the more experience you have, the more valuable you are, regardless of what your GPA may have been, however many years ago.
Yeah, no question. When you were talking, Zachary, it reminded me of a conversation I had with a woman who works as a patent attorney now, but at one point she was an engineer. And when she was an engineer, she would always get frustrated by the fact that certain people would move ahead of her in the job because she was under the impression that if you just are technically sound or just good at your job, that people will notice and that you'll get the promotions and the pay raises that you deserve. But she eventually got her wake up call. That's not necessarily the case. You've got
Yeah, yeah. Another piece of, I could not agree more. Another piece of advice I often tell students is that the quicker you can learn that the universe isn't fair, the better off your life is going to be. There are good people that get fired. There are, not so great people that get promoted. There are, not so great people that win the lottery, and very earnest people who struggle financially. That's just the nature of the beast, right? So, and in the cases like you say, it would be nice if merit and certain other factors were the only factors, but oftentimes it's more complicated than that. So yeah, it's not just about and again, it ties into what we were talking about before about the soft skills. You got to advocate for yourself. You've got to be, disagreeable to a certain point. You've got to, really, you got to fight your own fights, because oftentimes no one else is going to do it for you, right? So it's a good lesson to learn.
Yep, 100%. And I think she learned it eventually. And hopefully anybody who's listening to this podcast, or people that we speak to, that's something we definitely need to get out there, because people just think I just do my job and the rest will take care of itself. No, it won't. You're gonna be that engineer in their cubicle mad because you saw another engineer get the promotion and pay raise you thought you deserved. But you know what they were better at than you? Talking to people, advocating for themselves. Just getting out there and making them being visible to other people, as opposed to sitting down with their head, sitting with their head down doing their job, which is, obviously you got to do that. But if you said it, if you don't advocate for yourself, who the hell will? If you expect other people to, I mean, they're advocating for themselves. They're thinking about themselves. You think you're top of mind to them?
Yeah. Well, and also there's different ways to provide value. I mean, technical acumen is certainly a big part of a lot of the jobs, and especially the engineering field. But there are things beyond just being good at the engineering portion. It's how do you provide value as a leader, as a public facing person for your department or your company. So it's not just about who can do the best math. It's also about who can provide all those kind of intangibles as well.
Yeah, no question. So I mentioned in the intro that you're a reservoir storage engineer. Is that something that you were looking to do, or is that something you kind of fell into?
No, not at all. So, and not only was I not necessarily looking to get into petroleum engineering when I was a freshman in college, I was not looking to get into the underground storage business. Like I said, I started my career working overseas, and I missed that work every day. It was a great. I really, really enjoyed that, and I got a lot of exposure to places around the world. I met a lot of people, saw a lot of different cultures and different places that I would have never. I mean, when the town I grew up in, West Virginia, didn't have a stoplight, right? So the idea that I would be living in Malaysia and Saudi Arabia and Australia and spending time in Singapore and Brunei and all these kind of places, was just, a huge opportunity for me. But it's a very difficult lifestyle. You're working, oftentimes, over 300 days a year, and a lot of time offshore away from family, and a lot of physical work and things like that. So eventually I decided to come back to the area. I took a job. A colleague of mine from college had recently joined a gas company, and they had an opening, and they put me in touch, and that's where I took it. And originally it was just, often we say it was a place to land, right? It was a job where it just gave me a foothold. It wasn't something I was passionate about. But it was an opportunity with the largest pipeline company in the country, working in their underground storage group. So I would be managing those underground storage fields we talk about, where we inject the gas in the summer and withdraw it during the winter, to supply the pipeline and basically to keep people in Michigan and New England and in Pennsylvania warm in the winter. So I took that job, and then I kind of fell in love with it. So I spent 13 years there, and now I've spent the last 3 years as a consultant working for a firm that does that same kind of work for countries all across the country and the globe. And so it wasn't something it's actually a very small portion of the industry. And I really didn't know much about it. I was aware of it, but it wasn't something that you kind of, honestly, the bigger, flashier jobs are, being a reservoir engineer for Chevron or Exxon, or being a drilling engineer, working offshore, doing some of the things. That's what you kind of gravitate to, just because it sounds more exciting, and it is pretty exciting in and of itself. But yeah, I kind of fell into the midstream part of the sector or part of the industry, as I mentioned, and then I've worked in gas storage now for 15 plus years, and I've really enjoyed that work because it's very practical. I mean, you provide a service that helps people. You're very literally powering people's existences. Like, you're providing them with the commodities they need to keep their factories running, to keep their power plants on, and to keep their homes warm in the winter. So it was always a very practical opportunity to use what I had learned in school, but in applying it in a way that was a little bit non-traditional, but ultimately very, very useful in terms of the broader society.
Nice. You know, I also mentioned in the intro, Zachary, that you do work with the Society of Petroleum Engineers. What was the motivation for you to get involved with that organization, and what keeps you involved?
Yeah, so I started getting involved. Society of Petroleum Engineers, or SPE as we call it, is the largest professional organization for our discipline, and we've got about 70,000 members globally, and it fluctuates, based on the industry. We are a cyclical industry. We have booms and busts, obviously, so I started when I was in college. We have student chapters, and you get involved. And at the time, if I'm being honest, much like most people, you get involved with student organizations in college because it looks good on your resume and they have pizza at the meetings, right? So I'm not going to pretend like I'm any different than that. But I mean, I always valued it as a sense of professional pride, right? If this is the career path that I was going into, these were the people that were doing it. I wanted to be part of that. And it gave you good opportunities for networking and a good technical resource, putting you in conferences and meetings, putting you in touch with senior engineers and other folks who you could use to grow your network, to grow your sphere of influence, and to learn from. And then after I moved, it was very difficult to be involved in the organization while you're abroad, because of simply just working too much. And when you're offshore, you can't really attend too many meetings. And this was long before the days of Zoom calls and webinars and things like that. So when I moved back to the States, however, we had a local section here in West Virginia. And so I started going to the meetings, and then there was opportunity. They needed some volunteers to help serve as an officer. And within a couple of years, I found myself being the chairperson of our local section, not because I necessarily wanted to, but because it was essentially my turn to be the volunteer. And that was about 10 years ago. And I've been I've been in the leadership of that local section for quite a while, except for the last 3 years, where I've been serving on the international board of SPE. So I was approached by one of the outgoing board members and was nominated to serve on the international board. And so I, along with 19 of my peers from all across the country and all across the professional landscape of our discipline, we are essentially the executive team that runs the organization, and we're a very large organization, run events all over the globe, and like I said, we have right now about 60 to 70,000 members, just professional members, about the same number of student members. The reason I enjoy that, being involved, is because honestly, I want to give back to an industry that's done so well for me, and I want to be part of the community, right? I mean, it's the folks that have the same kind of dedication that I do to providing reliable, affordable, and abundant energy for people all across the globe. That's the biggest predictor of success, of escaping poverty. That's and I know in modern times, oftentimes our industry is demonized, but we've done a lot of good for humanity by providing that energy that's allowed us to innovate, that's allowed us to take advantage of quality of life, and that continues to do that. So I like to be part of that. Those solutions. We like to help mold the organization to adapt to the changing energy markets. And again, it's just that sense of professional pride. This is the career path that I've chosen, so I definitely want to be part of the professional society that represents that.
Nice. Zachary, when you were talking, it reminded me of just being that engineer that had to give presentations, that had to talk in front of people and not being the best at it. I remember this was during my second job. My first job didn't even require me to talk really all that much. I did a lot of work in a lab, which I didn't mind. And then that second job, they told me I was going to be a project lead, which required me to give presentations in front of management every month. And it was at that point that I realized, you know what, maybe I should have worked on my presentation skills, because those first few presentations were absolutely horrendous. But I noticed a lot of the other engineers weren't all that much better at it than I was. But that was my wake-up call that perhaps this is something that I need to get better at. At what point did you realize that maybe presenting in front of people, just being able to communicate with others, could be a benefit to you?
Yeah, this is very interesting. And when you reached out to me, and I watched some of your previous interviews, it's such an interesting topic for me, because it may seem, and of course I give talks pretty much every week, either virtually or in person at this point. I was the most introverted person that you could have met up until basically my mid-20s. All growing up, I was extremely backwards and shy, and even in college and in my first few years of working in the professional world, I was not particularly good communicator, and I sometimes even I look back with a little self-awareness, and I'm kind of amazed at where I've gone. I'll tell you the first point that I'll tell you what broke me out of that was working offshore. When you work in such a high consequence dynamic environment like that, where communication is so critical, and maybe not in the sense of public speaking or presentations, but just in terms of raw communication, be able to quickly and effectively relay information that has very high stakes attached to it in terms of both health and safety as well as commercial implications. You realize very quickly, or you learn very quickly, to break out of your shell and to not worry about being uncomfortable in a conversation. And so I think that's where it started in terms of the trajectory of being a little bit more confident and capable public speaker. But in my job, my previous job where I was working for the gas company, you did have more opportunities to speak with your, to educate people on the topic of underground storage, because much like the questions you asked me, that's oftentimes what we were asked to do, was to give training courses to new hires on underground storage, because they understand what a pipeline is, they understand what drilling a well might be, but they don't understand the storage part of it. So there's often quite a lot of need to give presentations both to external and to internal stakeholders on that. And so that started getting me in the habit of preparing slides and presentations and understanding how to do that. And then the more and more you practice that, the more and more it became kind of commonplace. And then as I got more involved in advocacy, taking more roles on within the SPE, I had more opportunities to give more talks to larger and larger groups. And even now, I do that, like I said, pretty much, I've got one scheduled tomorrow. I'll be up on the campus of my alma mater. I'll be driving up to Morgantown to speak with WVU. In the past month, I've spoken at Penn State, St. Francis, Mississippi State, and the list goes on, and that's just the students. And then the other opportunities, which I bring up not to kind of pat myself on the back, but more just to explain that the frequency, it's like any other skill. You practice to get better at things, right? You become a better presenter, you become a better public speaker by presenting and speaking publicly. And so that was my journey to where I am today, where right now it's very easy for me to get up in front of several hundred people and talk kind of on the fly, to be perfectly honest with you. But that was not ingrained in me from birth. That was a skill set that I had to learn the importance of many years ago, and then develop over the last decade plus.
Do you ever get nervous before giving a presentation? And if so, how do you deal with your nerves?
I will admit at this point, not really. And again, that's not to say that I didn't in the past. It's just, again, as you build up a tolerance to that, you become more confident, it becomes more commonplace, and then it's just very easy to kind of jump into things without worrying about that. But in the past, when you would get nervous, the main thing I can think about is, I know it sounds cliche, but you just take a deep breath and you slow down. And that's the biggest thing that I realize, is that I oftentimes, when I get nervous, I talk very quickly. I talk a lot in general. It's one of my flaws, and I can sometimes talk very quickly. But it's important to recognize, to just kind of slow down. And then as you slow down mechanically, then your blood pressure goes down, your nerves get calmed, and then it's a little bit easier. And it's also a good trick I've found is when you do start presenting, if you can just kind of focus on the people that you notice that you may know in the crowd, or that you see are most engaged in your presentation. And then you can realize I'm not focusing on speaking to the 200 or 300 people in the room. I'm speaking to the 1 or 2 people that I know, are really paying attention, and then are going to be receptive of my message. So, some little tricks like that. But ultimately, it's just about recognizing that, if you think something, it'll manifest, at least in that sense, right? If you think calmly and take your time and kind of relax, eventually the chemistry of the body will respond to that as well.
I don't think it's cliche to say take a breath and slow down at all. I think that's the best advice you could possibly have to give when it comes to giving a presentation. Although I did get some interesting advice yesterday. So I was recording another episode for this podcast, for this YouTube channel, and I was with another guest, and she says before she gives a presentation, let's see, what does she do? She does her vocal exercises for her vowels. So A-E-I-O-U, just pronouncing them really, over pronouncing them, I suppose. And then she also takes a bite of an apple, because she says that when you do that, it increases saliva, so you don't lip smack. And then she also bends over her waist so that her torso is parallel to the ground, and then she shakes out her arms. And so she has this whole process that she goes through before she gives the presentation. And I remarked that I hope you don't do this when other people are around, because they're gonna think you're nuts. You see the person just shaking, biting an apple and going A-E-I-O-U.
Well, and even outside of that specific, kind of sequence, I think there is some value probably just in the routine itself, right? Is just knowing that, I do this kind of preparation every time. So it becomes, again, more commonplace and familiar. And so you reach that point going into your presentation or into your speech, where you do feel comfortable because you've gone through the same sequence of events that you always go through. And so it does become kind of commonplace. So that's good advice as well. Nice.
Well, this has been really great talking to you, Zachary. Thank you for being a guest. How can people get in touch with you?
Well, I'm on LinkedIn. I'm pretty, that's the only social media I use, but you can contact me on LinkedIn. My personalized URL is Zachary Evans Petro, as in petroleum. So you can look me up there. That's Zachary with an H. And then if you want to drop me an email, my personal email is zacharyevans@gmail.com. You're more than welcome to do that. And like I said, I'm all the time, traveling the country and speaking with folks, and happy to speak with folks in the future, because this stuff we're talking about here, that kind of personal development stuff, it was a huge benefit to me over my career, and I'm certainly happy to give back. And I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you about this morning, because it's a lot of great information that people can surely benefit from.
No question. Well, everyone, that marks the end of another edition of Teach the Geek interviews. My name is Neil Thompson, founder of Teach the Geek. It's an online platform for science and engineering professionals. I'm also the creator of the Teach the Geek to Speak online public speaking course. You can check it out at teachthegeek.com. Again, that's teachthegeek.com. Until next time, take care and stay safe. Thanks, Zachary.
You're welcome. Thank you.